Have you noticed that the conversation about aging tends to focus on what you should give up? Less sugar, fewer indulgences, a shrinking list of pleasures as the years accumulate. But there is another way to think about this entirely. What if aging well has less to do with subtraction and more to do with architecture, the quiet, daily construction of a life designed to support you through every decade? The longest-lived people across the planet did not spend their years chasing longevity. They built it, piece by piece, through patterns so ordinary they almost escape notice. And those patterns, once you see them, change everything about how you understand your own future. You are listening to the Longevity Library, where we archive the wisdom of healthy aging. The architecture of longevity. Foundations for a well-lived life. There comes a moment in midlife when the questions begin to shift. The focus moves from building careers and raising families towards something more reflective, an inquiry into how to inhabit the coming decades with vitality, clarity, and purpose. This is not about chasing youth or defying time. It is about understanding the patterns that allow people to move through their later years with ease rather than limitation, with engagement rather than withdrawal. What follows is an exploration of those patterns, drawing on observations from communities where people live remarkably long, healthy lives, and on research that has illuminated the mechanisms behind aging. This is an invitation to consider how small, consistent choices shape the trajectory of our years. No single practice guarantees a long life, but certain principles appear again and again among those who age well. And understanding them offers a kind of map, not a rigid prescription, but a set of landmarks to guide the way. The landscape of aging. What changes and what doesn't. To understand how to age well, it helps first to understand what aging actually is. This is not as straightforward as it might seem. Aging is not simply the passage of time. It is a biological process, a gradual accumulation of changes at the cellular level that eventually affect how our bodies and minds function. Consider for a moment the cells that make up your body. They are not static structures, but living entities that constantly divide, repair themselves, and produce energy. Over decades, this activity generates wear and tear. DNA accumulates small errors. The power plants of cells, structures called mitochondria, become less efficient. Proteins that should fold neatly into specific shapes begin to misfold and clump together. Cells lose their ability to divide and function properly, entering a state known as senescence where they linger but no longer contribute as they should. These microscopic changes eventually become noticeable. Skin loses elasticity. Muscles shrink and weaken. Joints feel stiffer in the morning. Recovery from illness or injury takes longer. Mental quickness may seem to dull slightly, though wisdom and pattern recognition often sharpen. But here is what matters. The rate at which these changes occur varies enormously between individuals. Two people of the same chronological age can have vastly different biological ages, the actual condition of their tissues and organs. This gap between chronological age and biological age is where the possibility of influencing longevity lies. Research suggests that perhaps only 20 to 30% of how we age is determined by our genes. The rest is shaped by environment, lifestyle, and the cumulative effects of our daily choices. Certain genetic variants appear more frequently in people who live to 100 and beyond, suggesting that some individuals inherit advantages in DNA repair or inflammation control. But for most of us, the way we live exerts a powerful influence on how our genes express themselves. Genes load the gun, as the saying goes, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. This understanding shifts aging from something that simply happens to us towards something we participate in. We are not passive passengers on a predetermined journey. We are active contributors to the architecture of our own longevity, building it day by day through the foods we eat, the movements we make, the connections we maintain, and the rest we allow ourselves. The first pillar, movement as maintenance. Perhaps the most consistent observation among people who age well is that they move. Not necessarily in structured exercise sessions with heart rate monitors and periodized training plans. They simply move throughout the day in ways that keep their bodies engaged with the world. In communities identified as having high concentrations of long-lived individuals, places like Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Ikaria in Greece, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica, people do not go to gyms. They garden. They walk to visit neighbors. They tend animals. They work with their hands. Movement is woven into the fabric of daily life, not segregated into a separate compartment. This distinction matters. When movement is integrated into life, it accumulates throughout the day rather than occurring in a single concentrated burst. The person who gardens for an hour, walks to market, and moves around the house performing various tasks accumulates more total physical activity than someone who sits for 9 hours, then exercises vigorously for 45 minutes. The body seems to respond better to this constant, low-level demand than to the feast or famine pattern common in modern life. From a physiological perspective, movement triggers numerous processes that support healthy aging. Muscles, when used, release molecules that communicate with other tissues. These signaling molecules, sometimes called myokines, travel through the bloodstream and influence fat metabolism, brain function, and inflammation levels. A moving body is a communicating body, constantly sending messages that promote repair and maintenance. Weight-bearing movement, in particular, tells the skeleton to maintain bone density. Bones are living tissue that respond to the loads placed upon them. When mechanical stress is applied through walking, lifting, or even standing against gravity, cells within bone register this stress and respond by strengthening the structure. Without this stimulus, bone density gradually declines, a process that accelerates in later years and can lead to fragility. Balance is another quality that movement preserves, often without us noticing until it begins to diminish. The sensory systems that keep us upright, vision, the vestibular system in the inner ear, and proprioception from nerves in our joints and muscles, all require regular input to maintain their accuracy. Walking on uneven ground, standing on one foot to pull on a sock, stepping over obstacles in a garden. These mundane actions train the balance system in ways that gym equipment cannot replicate. For those who have been sedentary for years, the body retains the capacity to respond to movement. Muscle tissue, when stimulated through resistance, begins to rebuild itself at any age. Studies have shown that individuals in their 80s and 90s can increase muscle strength and size through appropriate training. The response may be slower than in younger years, but it remains present. The body retains its ability to adapt. The practical implication is straightforward but profound. Find ways to move that fit naturally into life. Walk rather than drive for short trips. Take stairs when they are available. Carry groceries rather than pushing a cart. Tend a garden if space allows. Stretch while watching television. These small movements, repeated thousands of times across months and years, accumulate into something significant. The second pillar, metabolic balance and the energy equation. At the core of how we age lies the question of energy, how we take it in, how we use it, and what happens when we take in more than we need. The relationship between energy intake and energy expenditure shapes numerous aspects of the aging process. When food is consumed, particularly food containing carbohydrates, blood glucose rises. The pancreas releases insulin, a hormone that directs cells to take up this glucose for immediate use or storage. Insulin also signals fat cells to retain their stores and discourages the breakdown of existing fat for energy. This system evolved to handle occasional feasts followed by periods of scarcity. In environments where food is constantly available, the system can become overwhelmed. Over years of constant insulin stimulation, cells may begin to resist its signal. The pancreas responds by producing more insulin to achieve the same effect. This state of elevated insulin and blood glucose, sometimes called metabolic dysregulation, has been associated with numerous age-related changes. It creates an environment where energy is directed towards storage rather than repair, where inflammation tends to increase, and where blood vessels may gradually accumulate damage. Populations that maintain metabolic health into advanced age typically eat in ways that avoid prolonged elevation of blood glucose and insulin. Their diets tend to be built around whole foods, vegetables, legumes, fruits, and modest amounts of animal products, rather than refined carbohydrates and sugars. They eat until satisfied but not stuffed. They do not graze continuously throughout the day, but have natural periods of eating and not eating. The composition of meals matters as well. When carbohydrates are consumed alongside fat, fiber, and protein, their absorption into the bloodstream slows. The sharp spike in blood glucose becomes a gentler rise, and the corresponding insulin response is less dramatic. This is one reason traditional meals, which combine foods rather than isolating nutrients, tend to support metabolic stability better than processed snacks designed to deliver rapid satisfaction. Fiber deserves particular attention in this context. Found in vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains, fiber slows digestion and modifies the absorption of other nutrients. It also feeds the community of bacteria living in the digestive tract. These bacteria, collectively known as the microbiome, perform numerous functions that influence health. They produce short-chain fatty acids that support the gut lining and enter the bloodstream, where they may influence inflammation and metabolism. They synthesize certain vitamins. They communicate with the immune system, much of which resides in tissues surrounding the digestive tract. The modern diet often lacks sufficient fiber, replacing it with refined carbohydrates that are rapidly absorbed and provide no fuel for the microbiome. Restoring fiber to its traditional place in meals supports both metabolic stability and digestive health, two factors that become increasingly important with age. Protein intake requires consideration as well. Older bodies become less efficient at using dietary protein to build and maintain muscle. This phenomenon, sometimes called anabolic resistance, means that protein needs may increase slightly in later decades, even as overall calorie needs decline due to reduced activity and muscle mass. Distributing protein evenly across meals, rather than consuming most of it at a single meal, may help maintain muscle tissue better than the common pattern of light breakfast and lunch followed by protein-heavy dinner. The third pillar, the architecture of eating. Beyond what people eat lies the question of when and how they eat. The patterns surrounding food consumption appear to influence health independently of the foods themselves. Traditional cultures rarely eat throughout the day. They have meals, and between meals they do not eat. This creates natural periods of fasting that range from 12 to 16 hours daily. During these fasting periods, the body shifts its metabolic state. With no incoming fuel, it begins to mobilize stored energy. Fat cells release fatty acids. The liver produces ketones from some of these fatty acids, providing an alternative fuel source for the brain and other tissues. This metabolic switching between fed and fasted states may have benefits beyond simple calorie management. During fasting periods, cells initiate repair processes that are suppressed when nutrients are constantly available. They remove damaged components through a process called autophagy, literally self-eating, where cellular debris is cleared and recycled. They become more sensitive to insulin signals. Inflammation markers often decline. The social dimension of eating also deserves attention. In many long-lived communities, meals are not hurried affairs consumed alone or in front of screens. They are shared with family and neighbors, often taking place at a relaxed pace. This social connection during eating may influence digestion through the nervous system. When the body is relaxed, the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system, sometimes called rest and digest, predominates, directing blood flow toward digestive organs and supporting optimal processing of food. There is also the simple matter of awareness. When eating is rushed or distracted, the signals of fullness have difficulty reaching consciousness before excess food has been consumed. The stomach stretches gradually during a meal, sending signals to the brain that take roughly 20 minutes to register fully. Eating slowly allows these signals to arrive before the meal has ended, supporting more appropriate portion sizes without conscious restriction. Alcohol appears in many traditional diets, but the pattern of consumption differs from modern norms. In places like Sardinia and Ikaria, wine is typically consumed with meals, in moderate quantities, and often shared with others. This pattern, moderate amounts consumed with food and company, differs substantially from drinking outside meals or in isolation. The food slows alcohol absorption, and the social context provides emotional regulation that might otherwise be sought through additional drinking. The fourth pillar, the nervous system and the stress response. The human stress response evolved to handle acute physical threats. When a predator appeared or a conflict arose, the body mobilized resources for immediate action. Stress hormones surged. Heart rate and blood pressure increased. Blood flow redirected to muscles, and non-essential functions like digestion and reproduction were temporarily suppressed. Once the threat passed, the system returned to baseline. This system works well for occasional, short-term challenges. It works less well when the stress response is activated chronically by the demands of modern life. Deadlines, financial concerns, relationship tensions, and constant exposure to news and social media can keep the stress response in a state of low-grade continuous activation. The body remains in a state of readiness that never fully resolves. Over years, this chronic activation takes a toll. Blood pressure tends to remain elevated. Inflammation increases as stress hormones alter immune function. Sleep quality suffers as the nervous system struggles to transition into rest mode. Appetite and fat storage patterns shift, often favoring accumulation of abdominal fat, which itself has metabolic effects. Observations of long-lived populations reveal patterns that buffer against chronic stress. These communities typically maintain strong social connections that provide emotional support. They often have cultural or religious practices that encourage reflection and perspective. They spend time outdoors in natural environments. They engage in activities that demand focus but not urgency, gardening, crafting, walking, which may shift the nervous system toward a more balanced state. The concept of having a reason to wake up in the morning appears repeatedly in studies of healthy aging. The Japanese term ikigai and the Costa Rican phrase plan de vida both point to this idea of purpose or direction. Having something that matters, something that requires engagement with the world, seems to provide a kind of psychological anchor. It creates structure and motivation that persist through difficulties. This sense of purpose may influence physiology through the nervous system. When attention is directed outward toward meaningful activity, the inward focus on worries and physical sensations tends to diminish. The stress response calms. The body operates from a different baseline, one more oriented toward engagement than threat detection. Sleep represents the most profound reset the nervous system experiences. During deep sleep, the brain clears metabolic waste products that accumulate during waking hours. Memory consolidates. Hormones that regulate appetite and stress are calibrated. Tissues throughout the body undergo repair. The quality and quantity of sleep in midlife and beyond predicts numerous health outcomes. Yet it is often the first thing sacrificed to busy schedules. Traditional societies typically sleep in patterns aligned with natural light. They wake with the sun and become sleepy after dark. Their circadian rhythms reinforced by exposure to bright daylight and the absence of artificial light after sunset. Modern environments disrupt these rhythms through constant access to light, particularly the blue wavelengths emitted by screens, which suppress the melatonin that signals darkness to the body. The fifth pillar, social connection as biological need. It is common to think of social connection as a psychological comfort, something nice to have, but not essential. Research suggests otherwise. The quality of social relationships in midlife and beyond predicts health outcomes with a magnitude comparable to smoking, blood pressure, and physical activity. This is not simply because people with strong social ties exercise together or remind each other to see doctors. The connection appears to be biological. The presence of trusted others influences the nervous system, shifting it toward a calmer state. Touch, conversation, and even the knowledge that support is available all modify stress hormone levels and cardiovascular function. Loneliness, by contrast, creates a physiological state that resembles chronic stress. The body, sensing isolation, may remain in a heightened state of alert. Inflammation markers tend to be higher in lonely individuals. Sleep is often more fragmented. Blood pressure may be elevated. These effects accumulate over time, contributing to the deterioration of multiple body systems. Traditional societies typically maintain strong social integration throughout life. Older individuals remain embedded in family and community networks. They are not segregated into age-homogeneous housing, but live alongside younger generations. They have roles that contribute to community life, caring for children, sharing knowledge, participating in decisions. This integration provides both meaning and the regular social contact that supports physiological regulation. Marriage or long-term partnerships appear in many studies as protective factors, but the quality of the relationship matters more than its existence. Chronically conflictual relationships may create more stress than solitude. The key seems to be the presence of at least one person with whom one can share concerns and receive support without judgment. Friendships beyond the partnership also matter. Social networks that include both family and friends provide diverse sources of support and stimulation. Friends may offer different kinds of conversation and activity than family members, expanding the range of experiences that keep the mind engaged and the emotions regulated. For those whose social circles have shrunk due to relocation, retirement, or loss, rebuilding connection requires intentional effort. This can feel awkward or forced at first, particularly for those who are naturally introverted or who have experienced significant loss. But the body responds to social contact even when the mind feels hesitant. The physiological effects begin with the first steps toward connection. The sixth pillar, environmental engagement. The spaces we inhabit shape our behavior in ways that are often invisible to us. A home that requires climbing stairs encourages movement throughout the day. A neighborhood with sidewalks and nearby destinations makes walking natural. A kitchen organized for cooking supports food preparation. An environment that demands nothing produces nothing. Long-lived communities typically feature built environments that encourage activity. They are walkable. Daily needs, food, social contact, services are within reach without automobiles. This is not by accident, but by design. Though the design often predates automobiles and was created for different patterns of life, natural environments appear particularly supportive of health. Time spent in green spaces has been associated with lower stress hormones, improved mood, and better cognitive function. The mechanisms are not fully understood, but may involve the calming effect of natural patterns, the phytoncides released by plants, or simply the invitation to move and breathe differently than indoors. Gardening deserves special mention as an activity that combines multiple elements known to support healthy aging. It requires moderate physical activity across a range of movements: digging, planting, weeding, carrying. It exposes the gardener to sunlight, which supports vitamin D production and circadian rhythm regulation. It provides access to fresh produce. It engages attention in a way that can be meditative, drawing focus away from worries. And it produces visible results. A harvest that provides both food and the satisfaction of having created something. The indoor environment also matters. Air quality, light exposure, and even the arrangement of furniture influence how the body functions. Adequate lighting reduces fall risk. Good ventilation reduces exposure to indoor pollutants that can affect respiratory and cardiovascular health. A bedroom that can be made truly dark supports better sleep than one with ambient light from electronics or streetlights. Temperature exposure may have effects beyond comfort. Mild cold exposure stimulates brown fat activity and may improve metabolic regulation. Heat exposure through sauna use has been associated with cardiovascular benefits in some populations. The body, designed to maintain internal stability despite external variation, may benefit from periodic mild challenges that keep regulatory systems active. The seventh pillar: cognitive engagement and mental flexibility. The brain retains the capacity to change throughout life, a property called neuroplasticity. While the pace of learning may slow with age, the ability to form new connections and acquire new skills persists. How the brain is used influences how well it functions. Activities that challenge the brain in novel ways appear more beneficial than those that simply repeat familiar patterns. Learning a new language, mastering a musical instrument, or acquiring a skill that requires coordinated mental and physical effort. These activities demand that the brain form new connections. Crossword puzzles and similar games, while enjoyable, may not provide the same stimulus because they draw on existing knowledge and patterns rather than requiring novel responses. The social dimension of cognitive engagement matters as well. Conversation requires rapid processing of verbal information, interpretation of social cues, and formulation of responses, a complex cognitive task that exercises multiple brain systems simultaneously. This may be one reason socially engaged individuals tend to maintain cognitive function better than isolated individuals. Physical activity and cognitive function are not separate domains. Movement increases blood flow to the brain and stimulates the release of factors that support neuron survival and new connection formation. The same walks that strengthen muscles and improve cardiovascular function also deliver benefits to the brain. Activities that combine physical and cognitive demands, dancing, for example, which requires learning sequences while moving, may be particularly valuable. Attitude toward aging itself may influence cognitive outcomes. Individuals who hold negative stereotypes about aging, who believe that decline is inevitable and irreversible, tend to show greater cognitive decline over time than those with more positive views. This is not simply a matter of optimism. Beliefs shape behavior. Those who expect decline may engage less with challenges, withdrawing from activities that would maintain function. Those who view aging as a period of continued growth may seek out the stimulation that preserves ability. The integration of principles. These pillars do not operate in isolation. They interact, each supporting and amplifying the others. Movement improves metabolic function. Metabolic stability supports brain health. Social connection reduces stress, which improves sleep, which supports metabolic regulation. The whole forms a system where improvements in one area tend to create benefits throughout. This systemic view explains why simple prescriptions often fail. Telling someone to exercise more without addressing the social isolation that makes exercise unappealing, or the poor sleep that leaves them too tired to move, ignores the reality that human health is not a collection of independent factors but an integrated whole. Change must be supported across multiple domains to be sustainable. It also explains why small changes can sometimes produce surprisingly large effects. Improving sleep quality may increase energy for movement. More movement may lead to better social contact if it involves walking with others. Better social contact may reduce stress eating. Improving metabolic markers. A single change, if it is the right change for that individual at that time, can initiate a cascade of benefits. The process of aging involves countless small choices repeated across decades. No single meal determines health. No single day of inactivity causes decline. It is the pattern that matters. The accumulated effect of thousands of decisions about how to spend time, what to eat, whom to see, when to rest. The question of longevity versus health span. Discussions of aging often focus on longevity, the total number of years lived. But those who study aging closely increasingly emphasize health span, the number of years lived in good health, free from significant disability or disease. The two are related but not identical. It is possible to live long while suffering through many of those years. It is also possible to maintain vitality into advanced age but die relatively suddenly from acute illness, never passing through a prolonged period of decline. Health span depends on the same factors that influence longevity, but the emphasis shifts slightly. Maintaining mobility becomes paramount, because loss of mobility often initiates a cascade of further decline. Preserving cognitive function matters for quality of life and for the ability to manage health independently. Metabolic health supports energy and prevents the gradual accumulation of conditions that erode function. The compression of morbidity is a concept that captures this ideal, living well until the very end, with the period of illness or disability compressed into a short time rather than stretched across years. This is what many people mean when they say they want to age well. Not simply to reach a certain birthday, but to maintain the capacity to live fully until the end. Achieving this requires attention to the factors that accelerate decline, not just those that promote health. Smoking, excessive alcohol, chronic stress, social isolation, poor sleep, and metabolic dysregulation all appear to accelerate the aging process, advancing biological age faster than chronological age. Reducing these accelerants may be as important as adopting positive practices. The cultural dimension. The way a society views aging shapes the experience of older individuals within it. In cultures where age is associated with wisdom and respect, older people tend to maintain higher status and engagement. In cultures where youth is idealized and age is seen as decline, older people may internalize these views and withdraw from active participation. These cultural attitudes influence policy as well. Societies that value their older members create structures that support aging, accessible public spaces, healthcare systems oriented toward prevention and maintenance, opportunities for continued contribution. Societies that devalue age create environments where aging becomes harder, where isolation and inactivity become more likely. For individuals, the cultural context may be largely given, but within that context, it is possible to seek out subcultures and relationships that support a positive view of aging. Finding communities where older individuals remain active and respected provides both social connection and a model for one's own aging. The personal dimension. Ultimately, the architecture of longevity is personal. The principles that emerge from studying populations and research are general patterns, but they must be adapted to individual circumstances, preferences, and constraints. What works for someone in an Okinawan village may not translate directly to a city apartment. What motivates one person may feel like deprivation to another. The process of adaptation involves experimentation and observation, trying different ways of moving, different eating patterns, different social engagements, and noticing how the body and mind respond. Keeping what works, releasing what is not. This is not a program with fixed rules, but an ongoing relationship with one's own biology and circumstances. For those in midlife and beyond, the question is not whether aging will occur, but what form it will take. The body will change. Capacities will shift. Some losses are inevitable. But the trajectory, the slope of decline, the preservation of function, the quality of the years, remains responsive to choice. The choices are small in any given moment. A walk instead of sitting. A vegetable instead of refined starch. A phone call instead of solitude. Early to bed instead of late screen time. These choices seem insignificant in isolation, but repeated across months and years, they accumulate into the architecture of a life. They determine not how many years are added to life, but how much life is added to the years. The rhythm of days. There is a pattern to days lived well that emerges from observing those who age with grace. It is not dramatic. It does not involve extremes of effort or deprivation. It involves, instead, a certain rhythm, periods of activity and rest, engagement and reflection, company and solitude. Mornings might begin with movement, gentle at first then building. A walk as the world awakens. Sunlight reaching eyes that have rested in darkness, setting the internal clock for the day ahead. Breakfast that includes foods that will release energy slowly, providing fuel without spike. Days include work of some kind, whether paid or voluntary, whether physical or mental. Purpose expressed through action. Problems to solve, creations to bring forth, contributions to make. Interspersed with this work, breaks that include movement and perhaps connection with others. Evenings bring a winding down, lighter activity, meals shared, conversation that strengthens bonds. As darkness falls, light dims, preparing the nervous system for rest. Screens are set aside. The body settles. Nights bring sleep, deep and uninterrupted, the great restorer. Dreams process the day's experiences. Tissues repair. The brain clears its waste. Morning comes, and the rhythm begins again. This pattern, repeated across thousands of days, builds something that no single intervention could create. It builds a body that has been maintained through consistent use, a mind that has been engaged through consistent challenge, a nervous system that has been soothed through consistent connection and rest, a life that has been lived, day by day, in a way that preserves the capacity for more living. The question of starting. For those who have not been living this way, the question arises, is it too late to begin? The answer from research is clear. Benefits accrue whenever change is made. The body responds to movement initiated at any age. Metabolic markers improve when eating patterns shift, even after years of less optimal choices. Social connection begun today reduces stress today, and today's stress reduction contributes to tomorrow's health. The changes that matter most are not heroic. They are not beyond reach. They are the ordinary activities that humans have engaged in for most of our history: moving, eating real food, connecting with others, sleeping, finding purpose in each day. Modern life has made these ordinary activities optional, substituting conveniences that allow us to outsource movement, outsource food preparation, outsource social connection to screens. But outsourcing these basics does not serve us well. The body still expects to earn its maintenance through use. The path forward involves reclaiming these ordinary activities, not all at once, Not perfectly, but consistently, over time, in ways that fit a real life with real constraints. Small steps taken repeatedly lead to places that no single step could reach. The view from later years. Those who have traveled far into the later decades often report that the concerns of midlife, the worries about status, achievement, accumulation, fade in importance. What remains is simpler: relationships, health, the capacity to engage with each new day, the ability to contribute in whatever way remains possible. From this vantage point, the choices that shaped the journey become clear. The decision to walk rather than ride, to cook rather than open a package, to call a friend rather than watch alone, to rest when tired rather than push through. These were not sacrifices. They were investments, compounded daily across decades, yielding the only currency that ultimately matters: the ability to live fully until the end. The architecture of longevity is built from such choices, not from rare moments of heroic effort, but from the ordinary texture of days lived with attention to what matters. The body, given reasonable care, responds by continuing to function. The mind, given reasonable challenge, continues to engage. The spirit, given reasonable connection, continues to find meaning. This is not a promise of endless years. It is an invitation to participate in the shape of whatever years remain. To build, day by day, an architecture that supports life as long as life lasts, and to fill those days with what makes life worth living. The architecture of longevity is not built from rare moments of heroic effort, but from the ordinary texture of days lived with attention to what matters. The body, given reasonable care, responds by continuing to function. The mind, given reasonable challenge, continues to engage. The spirit, given reasonable connection, continues to find meaning. If this reflection has stirred something in you, a question, a memory, a new intention, we would welcome your thoughts in the comments. And if you would like to continue exploring the wisdom of healthy aging, the Longevity Library holds many volumes still to be opened. Subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. This is the Longevity Library. Listen, learn, and live longer.